In this video, I want to talk about one of the most important connections between us and the fish, and that is our fishing line and our fishing knots. If you guys have watched my Bass Fishing HQ channel over the last month and even over the last year, I've been running a lot of different tests on knots, whether that's straight braid knots, straight fluorocarbon knots, braid to leader knots. I even did a test on trying to find the best fluorocarbon out there on the market. And there's been a lot of questions that have kind of come about from all the testing that I have done. And so in this video, I just want to talk about a couple. I think there are two really big questions and statements that I got that I just kind of want to address that I think are really, really important. Now, before I talk about those, I do want you guys to know that right now over at Omnia Fishing, as we're talking about fishing line, you can actually get all of your fishing line right now for 25% off at Omnia. That's actually a pretty substantial deal. And I think this deal lasts until the 27th of February. So basically for the next 7 days. So I'm gonna leave a link down below in the description. Click on that link, land on Omnia, shop your line, and save some big money right now. All right, let's talk about fishing line and fishing knots. Now, first of all, I want you guys to know kind of why I decided to test out the fishing line and the fishing knots that I did. And the biggest reason is that I like to try to put all the percentages in my favor when I go out there fishing, because I believe that a lot of the tips and a lot of the tricks that you hear, whether that's online, even from me, are what I call like 5 to 10% tips. Meaning that if you do this one thing different, it will probably give you about an additional like production value of 5 to 10%. Now that may not sound like a lot, but say you do 20 different things out there that are a little bit different than the average angler, that's gonna give you 200% better production when you're out there on the water. And that's how you can become a better angler, is by all of these 5 to 10% tips. Now, when it comes to fishing line and fishing knots, I've always believed that this is one of the most important connections between us and the fish. This is where things can go wrong really, really quick. And so the reason that I ran these tests is because, one, I've been getting into a lot more of like bigger bait fishing lately, like really trying to learn glide baits and big baits, because I just really, really enjoy that style fishing. And all those little, like the way that you tie a knot, maybe a leader knot, whether it's or straight fluoro knot or straight braid knot, I want to know what the best knot is in that situation, because I don't want to break a fish off if I hook into a giant. And also I do a ton of tournament fishing. And so like if I'm out there tournament fishing and money is on the line, I want to make sure that I am doing everything that I can to put the odds in my favor. So that's kind of why I've decided to do all this testing over the last really year. Now, one of the biggest questions that I got asked is actually on my fluorocarbon test. Now, if you didn't see that test, I took 29 different fluorocarbons and I just kind of put them through the ringer. I tested for things like line memory, abrasion, line diameter, breaking strength. There was a ton of different tests that I ran, and the best overall line, which this is going to be a little bit of a spoiler, but there's over 500,000 views on that video, so I'm not extremely worried about it, was the Spro Essential Series Gookin fluorocarbon. Not Guggen, Gookin fluorocarbon. So this line overall was the best. It actually tested #1 in a number of different categories, and it was very high on a few of those other tests. So overall, this was the best line. But if you watch that video, you will see that there were several different lines that scored better than this particular line in that particular test. So for example, the thinnest diameter line right now on the market when it comes to fluorocarbon was the Cigar Gold Label. This is an extremely good line. It's also an extremely expensive line, but it is a very thin diameter line. If you're out there finesse fishing, and you want a really thin diameter line to really make your bait look that much more realistic and that much more natural in the water, then going with the Cigar Gold Label might be the best bet. So that's something that's really important to know. Another thing, one of the tests that I did was abrasion resistance. And when it came to abrasion resistance, the best, most abrasion resistant line was actually Strike King's fluorocarbon. So I thought that that was interesting because the thing about Strike King though that you should know is that it was also the thickest line. It was the thickest in diameter. So it makes sense that this particular line was the best when it came to abrasion resistance. As a matter of fact, I tested 20-pound line. I think it averaged like 27 or 28-pound breaking strength. So it's actually a very thick line. It should be probably labeled as 25-pound test, not 20-pound test. But if you're out there and you are fishing, maybe you're flipping and pitching heavy cover, maybe bushes, maybe logs, then it might be best to go with that particular line in that situation. You see what I'm saying here? I'm not saying that this line was the best for every situation, but I'm saying it was the best overall. Another line that I thought this was a really kind of a crazy part of the test that I didn't expect was that what I found is that most fluorocarbons on the market stretched by about 20 to 25%, which is pretty similar to monofilament. If we're looking, a lot of monos are going to stretch 25 to 30%. So the amount of stretch in fluorocarbon is similar actually to monofilament, which that was shocking to me. Now there was a few different lines that stretch fluorocarbons that didn't stretch near as much as the other ones. One was Daiwa. Daiwa has a leader line, and it was by far the best. I think it overall it stretched by 13%. So that was like substantially better than the rest. Another good low stretching line was Berkeley Vanish. This is one that's everyone knows about Berkeley Vanish. It's a fairly inexpensive line, but it actually tested really well throughout the entire video in a number of different tests. Now the thing about that is if you're using baits where line detection and bite detection is very key, then that might be a better line to use in that situation. It might also be a better line to use if, for example, you're fishing a chatterbait or a lipless crankbait in grass. Because when you go to rip that bait in the grass, if you have a lot of stretch in that line, it's harder to rip that bait out. That's why a lot of guys will use straight braid sometimes when they're fishing a lipless crankbait or a chatterbait in grass. But instead, you could go down to a Berkeley Vanish or even that Daiwa line, although I think that's primarily a leader line, so it probably doesn't come in really big spools. But that might help you to be able to rip a bait out of grass better. So you see what I'm saying? The thing about fishing is I hate to overcomplicate things, and I try my best to not overcomplicate things in fishing. But I also want to address the questions that you guys had. So that's why in that video I said that the Spro line was the best overall line, because again, I don't want to complicate it. But if you want to really dig deep into the details, you can actually look at that video at the end of each test. I put the results in there. So you'll be able to see the best lines for that specific test. So if you want to pick up that line that is best for whatever situation you're using, you can. So now real quick, I want to talk about knots, because this is the other big thing that I tested. Now a question / statement that I got a lot when it came to knots was that the best knot that you can tie is the one that you know how to tie well. That's a comment that I saw often, and I 100% agree, 100%, because what I saw through all the different testing that I did with knots, whether that was straight braid or straight fluorocarbon, was that if you do not tie a knot properly, you will lose large percentages of your overall breaking strength. For example, I talked about this the other day, but one of the most popular knots in the world is a Palomar knot. It's a great knot for both braid and fluoro. But when I was doing that test, a lot of the Palomar knots that I did tested really high, but then I was kind of tying one pretty lazily, and I just realized when I pulled it together, I didn't like the way that it came together. And I'm sure that you've been out there on the water before and you tied a knot and you're like, yeah, I don't really love that. Sometimes we just want to get up there and go fishing. But in that situation, I actually went ahead and tested that knot just to see. It broke at 11 pounds, 11 and change. And this was 20-pound fluorocarbon that I was testing. So I almost lost 50% of my overall breaking strength because of the knot that I tied. So the statement that the best knot that you can tie is the one that you know how to tie well. That is true. Now, if you want to learn the best knots, that's why I did that test. You know, the double San Diego jam was the best fluorocarbon knot by a good bit. And the fish and full knot was the best braid line by a good bit. The FG knot is by far the best braid to leader knot that I have seen, especially in the bass fishing community. But again, you know, an Alberto knot for a braid to leader is a lot more simple to tie. So is it better to use that when it's super windy out and you're dealing with 4-foot waves and you know you can just tie it quickly? Probably. You know, so anyways, I just want to address some of those statements, some of those questions that I got, because those are the very popular ones. And like, I agree with a lot of it. And I just want you to know why I went with all the testing and did everything that I did. So anyways, that's all I have for you guys today. If you want to check out my most recent video, I will leave it linked right here, and I will see you guys tomorrow.